So welcome everybody. Thank you for being with us this morning. We are delighted to welcome Blevins Franks this morning to talk about cross-border financial advice in a post-Brexit world. So I'm going to hand over to Ben. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So yes, my name is Ben Simmonds, and I'm the Regional Manager of Western France for Blevins Franks. Today, I'm joined by three of my colleagues, and we are going to be talking, as Catherine said, about cross-border financial advice in a post-Brexit world. On the webinar, we have Rupert Holderness, who is our General Manager based down in Bordeaux. We have Mike Marsden, a senior partner of ours based in Valbonne. And on the theme of cross-border, we also have our Business Development Director, Jason Porter, joining us from London. So we're going to do today in three sections. We'll be firstly looking at how we actually operate cross-border. Then we'll move on to the residency implications for UK nationals moving across the channel. And then we will look at the implications on the financial advice that we actually provide. After that, we'll be more than happy to answer a few questions, should there actually be any, and we'll make sure that you have all our contact details. So if there's something more specific you want to follow up with afterwards, please, by all means, do get in touch. Jason, we're going to start with you. Could you just tell us a little bit more about Blevins Franks, please, and the services we provide? Fingers crossed for no technical faults. But Jason, you may be on mute at the moment.
There we go. Yep, is that fine?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning again. Good morning again, everybody. Yeah, I think it was probably 10 years ago, actually, the Daily Telegraph described us as the leading tax and wealth management advisors to UK nationals living in Europe. So that's quite a succinct description of what we do. We really pride ourselves over the last 45 years of building up a very deep understanding of what it's like for UK nationals that decide to move and live in France, and the cross-border aspects of what that means for them in terms of tax and financial planning. One of the things that kind of distinguish us from other firms that may well be in this space is that our partners have already gone through this whole process themselves in terms of relocating to France, establishing their lives, getting into the French administration system, and learning all the kind of ins and outs of establishing their life in France. We're based locally in France. We have 10 offices across the whole of France, and we're pretty much in most of the regions where you would expect to find any kind of sizable British population. And we would probably describe ourselves as the biggest player in this particular niche of the market.
Okay. And now, obviously, we're operating post-Brexit. What steps have Blevins Franks actually taken to operate legally within the EU?
Well, since the vote a good number of years ago now, we've worked very hard to try and decide what our structure should be. And we thought quite early that actually financial services may well not form part of the deal. And obviously that played out in real life when we saw the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that came out very recently. So we were working quite closely with our legal advisors, our tax advisors, etc., to decide what our structure would be. We already have within our group a French regulated and authorised business, which Rupert is part of. And we also have a UK business would actually previously passported into France, which Mike represents. So we have the two different aspects there that we had to take into account. So we looked at France, whether we should go that route. We also looked at Luxembourg to a certain degree, whether we should set up there. But the demise of passporting and the opportunity that Ireland presented to us was another route that we looked at very, very closely indeed. But actually, we decided in the end to go the Malta route, simply because we also had a very large administration office there already, with about 125 employees, which had various members of our senior executive located there. We had various different functions from financial planning to pensions and trust already established there. So it lended itself to becoming our main entity for passporting across Europe. So we then divided our European operation via Malta and passporting into Europe, and then we used our UK company for our UK advice and financial planning and tax advice. So that's pretty much the route that we've gone, and it's working very well for us. The Maltese authorities were very open and helpful and efficient. We looked at Ireland, but we discussed it with a number of other companies who said that Ireland took a particularly long time in authorising, and particularly where there was going to be a passporting route into Europe, because they didn't want to be seen as being used as a kind of brass plate operation. So we've established ourselves. We had a few issues. One of the most frustrating issues we have at the moment is bank accounts, which are taking an inordinate amount of time to establish. But we are pretty much there, and we're all up and running. So we're very pleased with where we've got to, and obviously trading quite happily within Europe via Malta.
Okay, and that's obviously what we've been able to do at Blevins Franks, but what's it meant for some other advisors?
I think where other advisors, because 85% of our business is in Europe, that's our specialism, is UK nationals moving to Europe, and France is a very large part of our operation. We knew that we had to get that right. Where it's almost the opposite way around, where you have a UK operation where they have passported for a few clients, then it really is an economic question. Is it really worth us establishing in various different European countries as individual subsidiary entities or branches, or do we actually wait for the equivalence route, which may well be coming up shortly? I think an awful lot of companies have decided to withdraw completely from the European market that may well have passported out of the UK, simply because it's just a huge amount of administration and aggravation. And the equivalence route allows the EU to withdraw their permissions just with 30-day notice. So it's not a particularly comfortable way to go to work ahead on a business plan when you could have your business model destroyed in 30 days. So we're quite happy with where we are, but we have certainly seen an awful lot of companies withdraw from the market.
Understood. And at Blevins Franks, what are the typical clients that you're actually looking after?
The main area is those that are retiring, quite often retiring early, 50 to 55, pretty much the age where people are considering that in some instances, and they would then tend to plan their move to Europe, be it France, Spain, Portugal, Malta, Cyprus, any of the 5 countries we're in. But then they're planning that. Quite often they may well have acquired a holiday home in advance, so may well have been visiting that for 5 to 10 years already. So they're quite used to the actual the country that they're looking and are interested in moving to. They may well have learned some of the language, but the kind of people are probably entrepreneurials that may well be selling a business, senior management within a business that may well have built up a stock portfolio in that business, people that have sold property in the UK and have done relatively well out of that, or may well have inherited money from parents that allows them to make that move to retire and to move to France. What our main aim there is obviously rearranging their financial affairs for the new country they're in. It's a completely different tax system, completely different legal system, and it's making sure that they're set up and arranged as fiscally efficiently as possible for them in their new life. So that's pretty much what we're doing. That's our specialism. But the typical client is in that entrepreneurial senior management kind of space, or those that have come into an inheritance or have sold assets.
And as you mentioned, at Blevins Franks, we obviously look after the tax-led wealth management aspect of things, but what other services do our clients actually require?
Well, an awful lot of our partners find that at the outset, it's almost a hand-holding exercise to establish them into their new life, because they won't know where all of the local, quite often they don't know where all of the local specialists are, like even just things like vets and that kind of thing for their animals, or doctors. Making sure they get themselves into the French administration system is very important. to get them established with the local authorities, make sure they're paying all the right taxes locally. So quite often it is a hand-holding exercise. Huge amount of what we've been doing at the moment, though, is all around the whole new relationship that the UK has with the EU and with France in particular, is around immigration and making sure that a UK national, when they're moving to France, is properly legally residing in France on the correct basis. So that now, instead of without freedom of movement, it doesn't allow UK nationals to move to France and then establish their legal residency thereafter. They're pretty much having to sort that out in advance before they go, if they know they're going to be there for more than 90 days, which obviously if you're moving, that's going to be the case. So a lot of what we're doing is establishing the right visas and residency permits for them, getting them a local lawyer to sort that out, and making sure that when they do move, they're doing it on the correct legal basis. And then they can get themselves into the system with a residency permit and make sure they can register at doctors, etc., going forwards.
Thank you, Jason. And Mike, I'm going to come over to you now because you're obviously based in France. You're seeing firsthand these questions. I mean, one of the big things that comes up is obviously now, is it more difficult to move and become a resident in France?
Well, I would say no, in short answer to that question. I mean, as Jason said, from a visitor's point of view, there's a restriction now that the maximum period of time you can stay in France is 90 days out of a total period of 180. But for those others who are thinking about becoming permanently resident in France, then there are other arrangements that need to be put in place to enable them to satisfy the French rules and regulations for them to become permanently resident. And there are different rules that apply to those who arrived in France before the withdrawal agreement as to those who are arriving in France going forward from here. But permanent residence just effectively opens up the ability to stay for the longer term and not be affected by the standard visa arrangements.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that what permanent residence really means and what you've got to do to actually tick that box?
Yeah, permanent residence really means that you've got to fulfill three main blocks on which we build the permanent residence status. Now, the first thing is that you'll need a permanent place of residence, a house that you either own or have had as a holiday home that you want to move into, or one you're going to buy, or one that you're going to lease for the longer term. So you've got a permanent place of residence. You will need to demonstrate that you've got a minimum income requirement to enable you to support yourself financially going forward. But above all, you'll need to make sure that you've got ongoing healthcare support, either provided by the UK or France, or through private healthcare provision. And those three things are the basic ingredients of being able to become permanently resident in France. Of course, there's all sorts of other things to do with documentation you'd need to supply, but those are the three main financial safeguards that France would be looking for.
And obviously, in a COVID world that we live in at the moment, there have been restrictions for people being able to travel between France and the UK. There's been restrictions from the people returning to their actual homeland. So could you just explain the impact of that?
Yeah, I think the travel and healthcare restrictions have been the big issue over the last year. We generally found that there are differences in terms of people that arrived in France before the withdrawal agreement at the end of December and those that will be arriving in the future. Those that arrived last year are able to apply for residence on the basis of a form of fast-track service, providing they apply on the website before the end of June. And the idea there is that it will formalise the relationship that they have with France that really effectively started at some stage in 2020. But it does bring with it one or two other issues from a general administration point of view that those need to be aware of. Number one being the need to do a French tax return for the period between their date of arrival and the 31st of December. That would normally be required to be filed in May this year. And secondly, they might need to, if they are used to driving in France, apply for a French driving licence to convert from the UK one. So, and that really has a deadline of December at the end of this year. So without those sort of moves, then France will become a little bit more of a problem. But generally, there's a fast track service to get people who arrived in France before the withdrawal agreement absorbed into the system as permanent residents.
Okay, and what is the position now with regard to the sort of COVID-19 programme?
Yeah, I mean, as Jason said earlier, you know, we do get asked all sorts of issues, hand-holding all the way through, but surprisingly enough, we've been receiving phone calls from people who've arrived in France, for example, at some stage last year, and then subsequently the vaccination programme has been rolled out in the UK, and it seems to be running with similar age ranges and similar health conditions, but it's possible that a UK national is being called for a vaccination in the UK now, but hasn't yet got to that stage if he was formerly in the French system. And generally, what's been happening is that there's a common sense approach now being applied, where if the residence application's already been started, it is possible for those individuals who are in France but being invited to go back to the UK for the vaccination, it's possible for those individuals to have their vaccination in France. It seems to me to be a more of a common sense approach to this. Some clients have been asked to supply an attestation of some sort from a notaire or accountant or relocation expert to vouch for the fact that they've already started the residence application process. But generally, there's goodwill on both sides of the channel, and these small number of people who are affected are being accommodated.
Okay. And do you think all of the new rules and regulations are actually going to put Brits off from making the move to France, or vice versa?
We don't actually see it that way. You know, as Jason pointed out, our soft spot type of client is planning for part of their retirement to be spent in a different jurisdiction to where they've earned their money. And generally, part of our planning process starts well before they actually choose to move across the channel. So there is a strategy being put in place to enable these people to achieve their dreams. And to be frank, they've set in motion a plan to move abroad for some of their retirement career, if I can call it that. And we're very happy to try and accommodate that. France is a different place, wonderful people, great country, and an awful lot more sunshine than you'll find in the UK. So we don't see there being a drop-off in the number of people that want to embrace France going forward.
I can certainly confirm your point as I look out on a dull, dry, horrible sky here in the UK today. But thank you for that, Mike. And Rupert, I'll come to you now to talk a little bit more about the financial advice aspect of it, because we've spoken about the impact of Brexit on Blevins Franks. We've talked about some of the residency rules, but will Brexit actually change the advice to Blevins Franks clients?
Well, basically, as usual, the answer is yes and no, Ben. And good morning, everybody. Our areas of expertise are tax, inheritance, retirement income, and investment planning for the British national living in France. So the basic elements of that advice will not change, basically for two reasons. The first one is obvious, that the tax and legal issues that we're looking at and the problems we're trying to solve are French problems. They're all to do with French rules, which are obviously not affected by Brexit. Obviously, as everybody knows, those rules change regularly, but not because of Brexit. And the second one, of course, is that double tax treaties exist. And those are bilateral agreements between, in this case, between the UK and France, which will not be in any way affected by Brexit. In any case, we've always favoured French solutions to the potential problems of becoming resident of France. So there again, those won't change. or they're dependent on French governments and French rules, and nothing to do with Brexit.
Okay, but so what will change?
Well, the changes will actually be in the detail, and there are certain theoretical changes, but whether or not they will actually affect our clients in practice still remains to be seen. And the basic principle is that the French government can now, and French tax authorities can now discriminate against British investments. And whether or not they will, it is yet to be seen. But certainly for in the past, we've always used, for instance, the favourable tax rates of the prélèvement libératoire for British investments. In theory, that advantage is only available to European investments. What will actually happen in practice will depend on what the formal classification of Britain's status is in its relationship with the European Union, because there are special rules for Norway and others, but as yet we have yet to see. The other, obviously, for those who are working, we've all been particularly worried about whether the UK will still participate in the European pension. At the end of the day, it looks okay for those of us already here, and in practice that I've had that confirmed to me myself, that my years working in the UK will be included in my career record in France. Whether that will be the case for those who are arriving now to work is another question. Obviously, that will depend on social security agreements that are put in place, and there is an awful lot more to do in defining Brexit and the relationship between the UK and the European Union. And what we've also been looking at a lot is obviously what might be the changes in UK rules. And the one that was much in the press last year was whether or not it would still be possible to transfer a British pension scheme out of the UK and into Europe after Brexit. Because now, in theory, the British government have the right to apply the prohibitive overseas transfer charge to any such transfer. We understand that particular problem is not happening at the moment, that the British government have confirmed that the overseas transfer charge will not be applied to a transfer out of the UK and into Europe, but obviously that could happen at any time. The other one that's been rumoured and is constantly coming back on the table one has done for many years, is whether or not a non-resident of the UK should benefit from a personal allowance. As far as we know, that is not on the table at the moment in any budget proposals or whatever, but it could come up again, and that would indeed change the tax situation of many of our clients, and therefore the advice that we might give them in the future.
And so what is your message that you're giving to UK nationals who actually want to become a resident of France?
Well, the message is France remains a great place to live, and very few people have insurmountable problems either becoming French residents or matters to be solved once they become French residents. So we say there will be some extra administration in order to get into the country, get into Europe, but once you're here, you should be able, as long as you have planned your situation correctly, there should be no problems with living long-term in France. And there are various misconceptions. And the first one is that France, the personal taxation is high in France. In fact, personal taxation is relatively low by European standards, especially since President Macron reduced the burden of wealth tax on your arrivals. But basically, income tax is very reasonable, as a lot of us know, purely because the French state is, which is in general highly taxed, finances itself through business, through national insurance, tax on business, and eventually VAT. Another one is inheritance tax. I mean, for an estate of any size, inheritance tax in France for your children can be considerably lower than it would ever be in the UK on the same size of estate or the same assets. And this is because even if the allowances are lower, the tax rates are considerably lower. And more importantly, inheritance tax planning in France is actually much easier than it is in the UK now. Obviously, there are the traditional problems of sort of planning, inheritance planning for the complicated family situation in France. And that remains, as it's always been, a major consideration, which obviously takes up a lot of our time when we're planning for our clients. But there are solutions. So basically, the planning that we are currently doing for our clients or for new clients just arrived in France has not changed in any dramatic way since Brexit.
Fantastic. And thank you for that, Rupert. I mean, we're going to go on and answer a few questions that have come in as well in a moment. But before we do that, Jason, Mike, or Rupert, were there any other points you wanted to cover now at all? Mike, were you trying to say something there? Just double check.
Only that there was nothing from me.
No problem at all. Okay, well, we'll look at the first question that came in, and I'll put it out there to Rupert, Mike, and to Jason, and if one of you can jump in. But someone's talking about if they've still got assets in the UK, and obviously there's a budget tomorrow, could that adversely affect me?
Shall I answer that one, Ben?
Yeah, go for it, Rupert.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, if the question is talking about a UK budget, then of course,
I believe so, yeah.
Or a French budget for that matter. Basically, the answer is yes, it could adversely affect your tax position in general. And we talked about the fact that the budget could eventually remove personal allowances, for instance, for non-residents, as has been mooted in the past. But ultimately, there can always be new measures which attempt to tax UK assets for a non-resident. Now, because the UK now has the right to do that for European residents. On the other hand, the chances are that it won't happen for two reasons. The first one is that the double tax treaty will always be there to protect you. And for most types of assets, apart from immovable property, the double tax treaty will not allow the UK the right to tax. They might be able to take a small withholding tax, as they used to do on UK dividends, for instance. But even if they do that, that tax will always be able to be set off against the French tax. Does that answer the question, Julian?
I believe so. I think nice and thoroughly. But if there's a follow-up question to that from the lady or gent who sent that in, please, by all means, get in touch afterwards. The second question was, we've moved to France, but our kids are still back in the UK. Will they be paying more tax if they die in France? So should they potentially move back to the UK, therefore saving themselves some tax? Don't know who wants to answer that, whether it's Mike or Rupert. It's quite a big question to ask, really, in front of the group.
It is. I mean, suppose there's a lot of questions you need to ask about, children, are they there for education purposes or what have you? But generally, as Rupert mentioned before, France has succession code, which often means that the overall tax charge on succession could easily be lower from France, from a residence and domicile point of view, than it might be in the UK. So a bit more digging needs to be going on there, but I wouldn't necessarily think that it's going to be more expensive for you to stay in France.
Thank you, Mike. And yeah, obviously, I think there's a lot of questions there that need to be asked separately. So feel free to get in touch. Another question here, is there a minimum time period to stay in France as a permanent resident?
I suppose I need to do that one. The answer is no. I mean, as long as you can be economically self-sufficient throughout the remainder of your life. I mean, once you've established permanent residence status, then you can stay as long as you like. We find that in terms of our clients who've left the UK at some stage, it is part of a retirement career, and they often find themselves in a situation after 10 years or so that they may well want to go back to the UK. And of course, that requires as much planning as the outward journey. But from that point of view, no, there's no end game.
And Rupert, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I suppose we could talk about the different levels of residence. Eventually, the first 3 months, of course, the French authorities are really not interested in your residence. It's after 3 months that you can start applying for residency. Then, of course, you've got the first 5-year period when you're not yet considered to be permanent as such. You're formally resident, but you're not permanent. And then, of course, you get onto the permanent residency where you have your permanent carte de séjour, which is renewable once every 10 years.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Rupert, for the addition there. Now, Jason, this question comes back to you because this is something you raised, but it said, Mr. Porter mentioned UK advisors. I have a UK IFA. Are you telling me that she can't continue to advise me?
Certainly at the moment, that shouldn't be happening. Well, the advisor isn't able to passport into France at the moment, unless they've gone for direct regulation via the French authorities, and unless they're passporting into France via another entity that is within the EU. That advice won't be covered by any professional indemnity insurance, and effectively, in fact, France has come out with recently with a document that has asked advisors that are outside of France, that are advising people in France, to confirm that they have all of the necessary permissions and authorizations to do that. So there is an obligation on the advisor to do that. And it's something we've come across a huge amount ourselves, where either UK IFA businesses have given up their clients, have told their clients they can no longer advise them, where we've obviously seen in a good number of articles, bank accounts being closed for UK nationals where the bank does not want to go through the process of getting passporting from another EU country other than the UK, and doesn't want to open a French operation. But also investment managers, where investment portfolios, they may well be based in the UK, the investment manager, but they don't want to go through the aggravation of perhaps establishing themselves in France or in another European country to passport into France. So I would say to the person there that the best thing they can do is actually have a conversation with their financial advisor and ask them on what basis are they advising them, and then that should hopefully force the financial advisor to actually give them an explanation of the position, and then the individual can decide what's the best way forward. But certainly that advice will not be covered by any indemnity insurance. Should that advice be found to be wrong, then that person may well have no comeback on that business.
Thank you, Jason. There's obviously a couple of people on the call that have sent in a question on a similar topic, which is commuting back to the UK for work. So I don't know who wants to perhaps discuss in a bit more detail, but the questions are, if I'm becoming a resident in France for sort of tax and legal purposes, what are the rules and regulations regarding me being able to commute back and forth to the UK? I don't know who wants to take that one first. Mike, it looks like you're going to go first, and then Rupert will come to you.
I'll have a go. This whole area of cross-border operation is a very detailed one and complicated, and I think what I'd rather do is not get into the detail of it now, but it is possible for people to be operating in and out of France. I mean, we found with lockdown, of course, that a lot of people have been able to carry on their UK activities from France, but I mean that leaves them vulnerable to French tax on a UK source of income without the right exemptions around them. So I think it's a very specific area, a very niche area, and I really think that we'd need a lot of background information before we could properly give advice.
Rupert, did you want to add some more?
Yes, well, I mean, I agree with Mike. I think it's such a big topic, but at the end of the day, I mean, for a British national, of course, you can always return to go into the UK to work. So I suppose it will always depend on what that particular job is, whether you're a salaried member of staff or whether there's a doubt about where your business is domiciled, because that's where certainly the French authorities are looking much more strongly at the moment, is with people basically working from home on computers but running their own UK businesses. Are they still UK businesses or not? So that's obviously where the planning needs to be done. It is more, I mean, obviously we work with many chartered accountants who have plenty of experience on this, but of course we're not chartered accountants. So we basically act as the general practitioner and then obviously call in expert colleagues when necessary.
Thank you, Rupert, and thank you, Mike, as well. We're going to take this as the final question now. There are a few others that are outstanding, and if we haven't answered them on today's webinar, we'll get in touch with you separately. But also after this, by all means, visit us online at blevinsfranks.com or send us an email to france@blevinsfranks.com. But the final question that came in for today was, I read about potential tax changes to the UK Lifetime Allowance Threshold. Will that affect me as a French resident? Rupert, are you coming in on that?
Yes. I mean, the answer is yes. The lifetime allowance for pension, for a UK pension fund, will affect anyone who has a UK pension fund, irrespective of where they are resident. Obviously, it is tested at various times. It's tested when you take the benefits of the pension scheme. It is tested if the pension scheme is removed from the UK, and it is eventually tested at 75 if it hasn't been tested before. So basically, yes, living in France does not avoid lifetime allowance considerations. I mean, we have pension specialists in the UK and in Malta who obviously, when they provide advice on UK pension schemes, make sure that element is well and truly taken into account. But it actually has been one of a reason why a lot of our clients have actually wanted to transfer their pension scheme out of the UK. I mean, into Europe. I mean, the main reason being that they live here. That's the main reason, is that they want to use it in France. But ultimately, having that lifetime allowance test once and for all now can actually be very positive for the future. You don't then have to worry about any future growth in the pension fund.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Rupert. And thank you to everybody who sent in those questions. It's very helpful. As I say, if we haven't answered your question, we'll be in touch. But also if there is something more specific you would like to cover, as I say, come and have a talk to us separately. But that's it from us at Blevins Franks. So we'll pass back to you, Catherine, but thank you very much for having us on this morning.
Thank you for this excellent presentation, I think, and talks and exchanges with members and non-members. So our next event will be during, we enter the months of ladies or International Women's Month. So we from on the 11th of March, we will have Catherine Colonna, the French ambassador to UK, who will come and talk about post-Brexit, and of course, as a woman, her leadership. So I hope to have all of you on the day, and I wish you a nice day, and hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.